power does not corrupt. It reveals. It peels away the layers of social convention, of necessity, of fear, until only the raw, true nature of a person is left. And in the entire bloody history of humanity, there is perhaps no greater or more terrifying revelation of what absolute power can do to a human mind than the story of Rome's third emperor. His name has become a synonym for madness, for depravity, for a tyranny so absolute it borders on the surreal. The man who declared war on the sea, the man who made his horse a priest, the man who proclaimed himself a living god and demanded to be worshipped. His name was Caligula. For 2,000 years his story has been told as a simple morality tale of a good prince driven insane by power. But the truth is far more complex and far more disturbing. Was Caligula truly a madman, lost in a world of delusion? Or was he something far more dangerous, a brilliant, cruel, and terrifyingly sane political operator who used the performance of madness as the ultimate weapon of terror? This is the story of the man behind the monster and the deadly game he played for the soul of Rome. To understand the monster, we must first understand the child. He was not born Caligula. He was born Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus in the year 12 AD. He was royalty of the highest order, a direct descendant of the divine Augustus and the beloved general Germanicus. His childhood was not one of palaces, but of military camps on the brutal German frontier. He was the son of a soldier, and the soldiers adored him. They made him a tiny pair of military boots, or caligae, and so he earned his nickname, Caligula, Little Boots. It was a name of affection, a symbol of the army's love for their little mascot. But this idyllic childhood was a lie. It was a brief moment of light before an unending darkness. The world of the Julio-Claudian dynasty was a snake pit of paranoia, betrayal, and murder. The reigning emperor Tiberius was a gloomy and suspicious tyrant. Caligula's father, the popular Germanicus, died suddenly, likely poisoned. His mother and two older brothers were arrested, exiled, and systematically starved to death on the orders of Tiberius. The little boy in the boots, the beloved mascot, was left an orphan, his entire family destroyed by the very power he was born into. He was summoned to the island of Capri to live in the court of the man who had murdered his family. For years he lived as a virtual prisoner in a den of paranoia and depravity, surrounded by enemies. He learned to survive. He learned to wear a mask, to hide his every thought, to play the part of the fawning, loyal subject, all while knowing that a single misstep meant a swift and silent death. It was in this crucible of fear that the boy died and the future emperor was forged. When Tiberius finally died in 37 AD, the news was met with a wave of euphoria across the Roman Empire. And at the center of that hope was Caligula. He was the last surviving son of the beloved Germanicus. He was young, handsome, and charismatic. When he entered Rome, he was hailed not as a ruler, but as a savior. The people called him our star, our baby. The Senate, eager to put the dark years of Tiberius behind them, showered him with honors and absolute power. And for the first 7 months, Caligula was everything they had hoped for. He was a model ruler. He gave bonuses to the military, abolished unfair taxes, recalled exiles, and staged lavish public games and entertainments. He was generous, respectful to the Senate, and loved by the people. It seemed as though a new golden age had dawned. And then everything changed. 7 months into his reign, Caligula fell desperately ill. For weeks he lay on the brink of death. The entire empire held its breath, praying for his recovery. He did recover. But the man who emerged from the sickbed was not the same man who had entered it. The golden age was over. The reign of terror was about to begin. The ancient historians, particularly Suetonius, paint a picture of a sudden and complete descent into madness. The illness, they suggest, broke his mind. The beloved prince was replaced by a monster. The stories are legendary and horrifying. He began a series of treason trials, executing senators and wealthy citizens on a whim, seizing their property. He was said to have indulged in incest with his sisters, and to have turned the palace into a brothel. He built a 2-mile floating bridge of boats across the Bay of Naples, just so he could ride his horse across it, to prove a prophecy wrong. But his most famous acts were those that blurred the line between tyranny and blasphemy. He began to insist on being treated as a living god. This was not entirely new. Dead emperors were often deified, but Caligula demanded to be worshipped while he was still alive. He built temples to himself, and even replaced the heads of famous statues of gods like Jupiter with his own likeness. He would engage in conversations with the statue of Jupiter, sometimes whispering, sometimes shouting at it. And then there was the horse, the story that has defined him for 2 millennia. He loved his horse, Incitatus, so much that he gave him a marble stall, a jeweled collar, and a house with servants. And according to Suetonius, he planned to make him a consul, the highest office in the Roman Republic. Was this proof of insanity? A man who talks to statues and wants to make his horse a politician must be mad, right? Perhaps. But modern historians offer a different, and in many ways more chilling interpretation. What if it wasn't madness? What if it was a performance? A calculated, terrifying piece of political theater? Caligula had grown up in a world where senators were sycophants and assassins. He knew they had stood by silently while his family was murdered. He despised them. By making his horse a consul, he wasn't just being eccentric. He was delivering the ultimate insult. He was telling the Senate, "My horse is more competent and more valuable to the state than any of you." It was an act of supreme, humiliating contempt. His claim to divinity can also be seen through this political lens. By declaring himself a god, he was elevating himself beyond the reach of the Senate's laws and traditions. He was no longer a first citizen among equals like Augustus. He was an absolute divine monarch whose will was law. His bizarre behavior was a constant, terrifying loyalty test. If you were willing to agree that his horse should be a consul, if you were willing to worship him as a living god, then you were loyal. If you hesitated, if you showed even a flicker of dissent, you were a traitor and you would be eliminated. In this view, Caligula was not a madman who thought he was a god. He was a ruthless autocrat who understood that if you can make powerful men accept an absurdity, you can make them accept anything. The most bizarre story of all is his supposed war on the sea. Suetonius tells us that after planning an invasion of Britain, Caligula marched his legions to the northern coast of Gaul, and then, instead of crossing the Channel, he ordered them to attack the water. He commanded his soldiers to stab the waves with their swords and to gather seashells in their helmets as spoils from the ocean. On the surface, this seems like the act of a lunatic, but again, there may be a hidden logic. The invasion of Britain was a hugely expensive and risky undertaking. It's possible the legions were on the verge of mutiny, refusing to go. By ordering them to perform this absurd, humiliating task, Caligula was asserting his absolute authority. He was showing them that their will was irrelevant. They would do whatever he commanded, no matter how ridiculous. The seashells may have been a translation error for the word masculi, which was also soldiers' slang for an engineer's hut. He may have simply been ordering them to dismantle the camp. But the story of an emperor declaring war on Neptune was too good to be forgotten, whether it was true or not. Madman or political genius, the result was the same. Caligula's reign of terror could not last. He had alienated everyone. The people who once loved him were now exhausted by his taxes and his cruelty. The Senate, which he had systematically humiliated, was filled with men who secretly plotted his downfall. And most importantly, he had lost the loyalty of the one group that could truly destroy him, the Praetorian Guard, his own bodyguards. The conspiracy was led by a man named Cassius Chaerea, an officer whom Caligula had constantly mocked for his high-pitched voice. On January 24th, 41 AD, after a public games, as Caligula was walking through a private corridor in the palace, Chaerea and other guards cornered him. Chaerea struck the first blow. The others followed. The emperor, who had declared himself a god, was stabbed over 30 times. His wife and his infant daughter were also brutally murdered to extinguish his bloodline forever. His reign had lasted less than 4 years. In the aftermath, the Senate tried to do to him what he had tried to do to their gods. They ordered a damnatio memoria, a damnation of his memory. His statues were smashed. His name was removed from public records. They wanted to erase him from history, but they failed. The stories of his madness were too spectacular, too terrifying to be forgotten. The true nature of Caligula's mind will forever be a mystery. Was he a victim of a traumatic childhood and a debilitating illness that shattered his sanity? Or was he one of history's most brilliant and cruel performance artists, a man who understood the raw power of fear and absurdity? The ancient sources written by senators who hated him are biased. They had every reason to portray him as an insane monster to justify their own actions and to serve as a warning against absolute power. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. A man damaged by trauma, corrupted by absolute power, and intelligent enough to use his own erratic behavior as a weapon. His story is a timeless and terrifying exploration of the human psyche under the ultimate pressure. It shows us that the line between a god and a monster, between genius and madness, can be terrifyingly thin. And it serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous man is not the one who is insane, but the one who is willing to pretend he is.